Thanks for joining us for part 2 of our discussion on Is Homosexuality a Sin? Today, we're talking about the forces that have shaped our beliefs about sexuality, not just the Bible, but culture, politics, and religious tradition. A lot of what Christians have been taught about homosexuality didn't come from Jesus or the early church. It came from later interpretations shaped by the values and fears of their time. We'll also walk through the usual claims that traditional marriage only means one thing, that homosexuality is against nature, or that LGBTQ people must live celibate to be acceptable to God. This conversation is about clarity, compassion, and undoing the narratives that never belong to the gospel. And with that, let's dive in. All right, you guys, welcome back to part 2 of our very exciting conversation on Is Homosexuality a Sin? So if you missed last week, go back and listen. I would say that's very important to understand the context and the history of what we're going to be talking about today. But Jaisa, it has been a wild ride ever since we dropped that episode. And
Yeah.
I would say mostly positive feedback,
Mhm.
but it definitely became very clear after last week that this is certainly a hot topic and one that stirs up a lot of really intense emotions on both sides, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. You did a really good job, I think, of framing up the episode for our existing listeners, the new listeners that we're getting every day, to just set expectations. Like, we understand that
Mhm.
this can be a very activating topic. And I think we've seen, to your point, a mixed bag. Like, we've seen people who, like, let's say, like, worst case scenario, they're really kind of spewing some hate and they're holding on to their hate. And then we're seeing
Mhm.
individuals that really are trying to get their Christianity right. You know what I mean? And I think that
Yeah.
when you're raised with, like, this is what you believe and this is right and wrong, and it is your job to save souls from going to hell and getting them to heaven, like, people really do feel like it's their duty in Christ to point out when people are, quote unquote, sinning or doing something that would prohibit them from getting to the kingdom of God. But what I really loved were the comments of people being like, whoa, I did not know this. And this is really
Mhm.
making me think. Or I've always known this, but I didn't have the data to back it up. Right? Like, people
Yes.
intrinsically knew as
Mhm.
Christians or as individuals that are homosexuals of being like, listen, like, I know my relationship with Jesus. I
Yeah.
know I'm a child of God, but it's the fear of everybody around me that I'm
Yeah.
struggling with. Right. So, gosh, and like, as your friend, I'm so freaking proud of you. Like, I
Oh.
love seeing you take something that you're passionate about and articulating it in such a powerful way that it's changing lives. Like, you guys, the amount of DMs that we're getting from you of people that are telling us, like, they're in tears, they feel seen, they feel loved, they feel drawn back to Jesus. Like, I have goosebumps
Oh,
now. I
that
mean,
just, yeah, I feel that in my
yeah.
heart big time. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and, like, that's
Yeah.
something that you and I have talked about often. Like, for as many comments that we get about us being like witches and false
Yeah.
prophets and, lying and pure evil and the things that we're called on a regular basis, really our hearts are more about, like, how do we create a space where people feel like they don't belong in Jesus and making them feel like they're seen and loved. So, guys, like, the messages that we've gotten that have articulated that have just meant so much to us. And we're doing the absolute best to respond to everybody. Like,
Yes,
we're
I know.
trying
We
so
really
hard.
are. It's hard. It's very hard to keep up, but we really are trying to respond, as best we can. But it's just hard when
Yes.
they're coming in, which is great because it means it's resonating. But it might just take us a little bit to get caught up.
Yes, be patient because it's really
Yeah.
important to us to be really engaged with our listeners and the people that are part of our Spirit Outspoken social community,
Yeah.
to feel like you're exactly that. You're part of a community. So
Yes.
yes, be patient with us. Like we're seeing all of them. We're just doing our best to respond. But on that, a lot of people have asked us, like, how do we help Spirit Outspoken? How do we help more people get
Mhm.
this message? So exactly what you guys are doing. We know that you're sharing the heck out of the podcast with your friends, your family, your community, which is awesome. Another way to help is to give us a 5-star rating and leave a review, because that tells Spotify, that tells YouTube, that tells Apple that we want to get this organically to more people, right? So
Mhm.
certainly everything you're doing, but if you want to help continue to get the message out with us, that is something you can do that would be incredibly helpful. And you guys, thank you. Like Rach and I are so ecstatic with the outpouring of love and support. And listen, like, knowing that we're activating some people by speaking up and advocating for fairness and equality tells us we're doing the right thing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we're just going to keep going, but we're doing it with you. And that feels really good and exciting.
It does. It does. Yeah, and today we're gonna continue the conversation. So last week we touched mainly on kind of the theological aspect of this, right? So we talked
Yeah.
about the clobber passages. So the main verses that are
Do you
often
know
cited.
why they call it that?
I don't. I
I don't.
don't.
Okay. I
But
maybe I looked that up while you're talking, because I was like,
yeah, I'd be
why do
intrigued to
they
know why.
call? Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah. And there's actually a book a lot of people have recommended that's called Unclobbered, which we linked in our newsletter this week. They recommended that as a potential source if you want some more information on this, because they also go through and break down each of these passages as well. But this week, we're going to kind of extend the conversation and focus a little bit more on culture, on politics, and on the church to look at how that has helped shape this. And it kind of created this as really the moral issue, if you will,
Mm.
of our life. And we're also going to look at just some common, I would say, arguments or perspectives that people have, um, of why they feel that homosexuality is a sin. Things like, well, I don't see it in nature, or it grosses me out, or, XYZ. We'll get into all of that as well and just kind of have a little conversation and maybe offer a different perspective people haven't thought of before.
That's so important, right? Because like part of this
Yeah.
is theological, right? Like, and I think a lot of people perhaps start there, but we're taking it a next step further, right? Because now the evidence that people were standing on to perhaps justify, right, their
Yes.
actions, their words, their viewpoints, when you
Yeah.
take that away, not everybody is going to say, "Oh, thank you so much for providing evidence that I can now show love towards these people," because
Yeah.
it goes so much further than theology. It's
Hmm.
cultural, it's political. Belief is one thing, knowing
Yes.
is another, right? So it's like
Yeah.
really kind of teasing that out. So I'm really glad that you structured this. And by the way, you guys, I just looked up why it's called the clobber passages, and it's literally because like the scriptures were being used to clobber people over the head. It's like like being weaponized. So like
Yeah.
that's why they're called that. Anyway, I
Yeah.
mean, very appropriate, I guess.
Says it all, I guess.
Says it all.
So, in last week's episode, we talked about how homosexuality first entered the scene, right? How that
Yeah.
word got into the Bible. And it was in 1946 in the RSV version. We talked about how the translation team received a letter from someone concerned that their understanding and translation using that word could potentially be used as a sacred weapon against people in loving consensual same sex relationships. The team met again and voted 7-3 that they agreed that it was the wrong word and went back and changed it to sexual perverts. But as we said, the problem was that under contract, they weren't able to make the change until this Bible had been in translation and circulating for roughly 25 years. And so in
Mm,
that time period, we had talked about how the Living Bible, the American Standard Bible, and the New International Version, which make up the majority of English Bibles, had all been created. In each one of those Bibles had used the RSV as their starting point, right? And so hence now homosexuality isn't just in one verse in one Bible, it's starting to spread. So today we're going to talk specifically and go a little bit deeper about the Living Bible and why this is so significant. Okay, so what I learned in the documentary 1946, which again, I recommend if anyone's interested in this topic, Fabulous documentary. You can find it on Amazon Prime, maybe YouTube, but just Google search it. You can find it. It's great. The thing with the Living Bible is it's a paraphrased version. A lot of people took issue with it because they felt like it dumbed down the Bible or it wasn't as accurate. But one of the main things that we need to note about this particular version is it took the word homosexual that had been applied to one verse in Corinthians in the RSV, and it now applied it to 6 verses. So the Bible went from having one verse with the word homosexual to now in this version having 6 verses, right? So we can see how this starts to spread from just one little tiny translation error. It's starting to, dissipate and show up multiple times in scripture. And the thing with this Bible in particular is that Billy Graham promoted this specific Bible. So at his major rallies where thousands of people would come out, this was the Bible that he was promoting and encouraging people to purchase. And so by the 90s, there's 40 million copies of this Bible in circulation in the US alone. Okay. And so culturally at this time, things are continuing to progress, right? So as we talked about, more people are starting to come out of the closet. We're starting to kind of understand sexual orientation more in terms of how we understand it today, right? As consensual, same-sex loving relationships. And in fact, the American Psychological Association in the 70s actually removes the title of this as a mental diagnosis. Because remember, it was labeled as a psychiatric disorder in the early 1900s, like we talked about in the
Which is
last
huge,
episode.
right? They were
Yeah.
like, wait, no, like there's nothing mentally wrong with these individuals. Like this is not that,
Exactly.
right? Like we're
Right.
evolving, we're learning.
Yeah. So culturally, we're starting to shift more towards acceptance, right? And then it was almost like when science stopped proving that this was an issue or, a topic that we needed to fear, then we start seeing politics and religion really amp up. Okay. And so what happens in the 80s? In the 80s, we have the AIDS crisis. Okay.
Mhm.
And now we have this living Bible, which is used by predominantly evangelicals, right? Because Billy Graham was an evangelical preacher. And we have preachers starting to claim that AIDS is divine punishment, that this is God punishing people for their sin of being gay. And as people are hearing this from the pulpit, now they're looking in their Bible, and their Bible's saying in multiple places that this is a sin and the punishment is death. Okay, so here is where we start seeing the shame, the stigma, and the fear just explode. Then we have the Reagan era. And we kind of start seeing this shift of like conservative religion and conservative politics kind of coming together here. And in the Reagan era is when we really see it unite. And the LGBTQ topic becomes a mobilizing issue. They need a moral issue to hang their hat on and solidify the conservative vote. And so this is going to be our topic of choice, right? This is what we're going to double down on to ensure that we get the Christian vote. And this is when you start seeing leaders like Pat Robertson and Falwell come out with like, you guys, these videos are horrible. I mean, the most terrible rhetoric about evil, vile, detestable homosexuals, blah, 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 blah. And it just amps everything up, right? And now we have a full-blown culture war going on in our society. It's
You know
so
what this
sad.
makes me think of? Oh, yeah, like what I remember seeing this meme once that was like nothing unites two coworkers than having a shared enemy at work. And it was like intended to
Yes.
be funny, but like it's true. It's like there
Yeah.
is something psychological. And it'd be interesting to explore this maybe on another episode. Like what is that? Like, what is that shared fear that unites people? And like, people know
Yeah.
what they're doing politically, you guys. Like, this is absolutely intentional. This is not just something
Yes.
that like accidentally happened. It's something that people use having a shared enemy. And like, think about like what happened with the Holocaust, right? It was like
Yeah.
what united the party under Hitler was fear and then a targeted enemy. And like, that was what was leveraged, right? So like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is like there's something psychologically that happens that unites people under this fear, but it's also intentional. And it's like
Yes.
once we know that it's happening and it's intentional, then the veil is lifted and then we can
Mhm.
start looking at things and critically think for ourselves differently, right? So like that's the point I'd
Yeah.
like to make about that.
And I don't want to get us off on a tangent, but it was interesting because you look back and you look at just the rhetoric, right, that's used very commonly and intentionally.
Yep.
To dehumanize other people and make them the villain. It was the same in Nazi Germany, the detestable Jewish, it was the
Vile.
same vile. It was the same with the homosexuals. And I would argue today we're hearing it again in the White House. And I don't want to get too political, but listen to how our president talks. And let that
Absolutely.
be a warning to anyone who thinks that's okay. When you start using
100%.
words like people are garbage, vile,
Dirty.
vermin, dirty, I mean, that should be a waving red flag. And to your point, Jaisa, it is all strategy and it is incredibly intentional and they know exactly what they're doing. So yes, this was not a moral issue in quotes. It was all a political strategy.
Yeah,
right?
and it's like when we saw what happened with the translation in 1946, you did a beautiful job of being like, this was an error. Like, this was not something where the translators were like actively trying to hurt the homosexual community, but like unfortunately that was the outcome. Like,
Yeah.
what we did see though was intentional. But like, hey, knowledge is power, and understanding our history is so important as part of our faith, because like that's when we can start acting and believing better, But anyway, okay, let's keep going.
Yeah. So then all of this is happening right in the 80s. And then from the 80s to like the early 2000s is really when we see people trying to clarify what homosexual means in the Bible, and these clarifications making things worse. So what happened is people started pushing back a little bit on the homosexual word. So all these different more modern translations tried to clarify in the notes what homosexual meant. And so one of the Bibles in particular is the ESV, and this is like the main kind of preferred Bible in the evangelical church. And if you look in the footnotes of that Bible, it refers to homosexuality as consensual same-sex relationships. And we just know that that all stems from they were putting their modern understanding of they were putting their modern understanding of homosexuality on a translation error, and it just made it worse, right? Because now instead of it just saying homosexual, now it's confirming and defining what that means.
Doubling down on that definition.
Doubling down. Yes.
You see that happy couple over there that's consensual same-sex. That's the particular one, you guys. It's in the footnotes.
Yes.
Right? Like, here, there's an official little reference here for you to reaffirm the mistake and the incorrect translation, right? Which is like, you see how we got to where we are, but like, it's all the more horrifying, isn't it? Like, the more you dig into this, you're just like, oh my God, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yes. And you see why people believe it, and that's what we said in our like, I understand. I'm empathetic. Like, it's in the Bible. It's in the footnotes of your Bible. It's your preacher's telling you this, your pastor's telling you this. I get it, you guys. I get it.
I know.
But that's why we're just really trying to help people understand how we got here, right? And maybe that'll help clarify some things.
Totally.
Okay. A few things I should note too, because we have had some questions in the comments about like, well, what is a good Bible? And this just brings me back to my point too, of there are Bibles who have gone back in and actually corrected some of these errors. So actually the new Revised Standard Version, which is ironic because remember the RSV, the Revised Standard Version is the one that entered this information to begin with. But the new Revised Standard Version, or the NRSV, is actually considered one of the most academically rigorous and accurate English translations out there. So if you're looking for a good one, this is the one that's used widely, like in universities, seminaries, and even mainline Protestant churches. And so they prioritize historical accuracy, gender-inclusive language, and linguistic precision, and they do not use homosexuality in that Bible. They actually go back and insert male prostitutes, sexually explicit, behavior, certain things to clarify.
Like, it was a journey for this Bible, like it was a journey.
This Bible has been on a walkabout, wandering in the wilderness. We've been a lot of places, done a lot of things.
They took a real wrong turn, but 90 years later, 80 years later, we are back we're back in
That's right.
business, you know? Like, it's been
Yeah.
a journey for this Bible. Can I just say really quick about, like, the
Yeah.
King James version? So, like, a lot of people,
Mm.
like, this is going to really surprise a lot of people. I would like you to do your own research because people are gonna be like, "You aren't
That's
right
not
about this,"
true.
whatever.
Yeah.
King James, who, like, and he did not do the translation. It's really important that I say, like, he does not do the
Yeah.
translation, but
Yes.
he, like, initiated the creation of the King James Version Bible. Scholars think that at a minimum he was bi, and very likely he was a homosexual. There are
Mhm.
many, many, many letters that are like that show him writing to male lovers, a very intimate, loving things that you would see from like a couple. Like people who quote often the King James Bible, I just want to let you know, like, and listen, like, we don't want to be like tit for tat. And if you're using, scriptures to weaponize the homosexuality community, you don't want to like turn it, but it's like, it is ironic. Right. And it's
Yeah,
like,
it is
it is
ironic.
sort
Yeah.
of an interesting factoid, which I didn't always know. So do
No,
some
I just
research
learned
on
that
King
recently.
James. And
Yeah.
like, if you go through our comments, people love to point that out. And I
Mhm.
get why, because it's
Yeah.
like, man, if you're quoting from that Bible, you should actually know who that Bible is named after. And it was actually an individual that seemed to have loving same sex relationships. Okay. So, like, put that in your pipe. I just told people don't use it in a smug
Don't
way.
use
And
it.
here I
I
am.
know. I
But
know.
do as
We're
I say, not as I
information
do.
sharing.
Okay.
Okay, we're sharing information.
We're sharing
Chase.
information.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to list two more Bibles because people have asked. New American Bible, Revised Edition, and Common English Bible.
Okay.
Are two more that tend to be really
More like
reputable, right?
respected as, yeah, reputable. Good.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So now, before we dive in, now we're going to kind of start getting into arguments, maybe. And one that we didn't touch on last week that a lot of people do bring up is the argument of traditional marriage, right? And saying that
Mm-hmm.
Jesus approved and defined traditional marriage as marriage between a man and a woman. This one, I just want to clarify because this always kind of, what do I want to say? I want to be nice.
Irritates you?
Yeah, because
Really chaps your ass.
chaps my ass. How do I want to say
I don't even
this?
understand what that expression means.
I don't want to find out either.
Do you think it's like chafing on your ass from like riding your horse or something?
Probably.
We have the giggles today, you guys. We've been laughing all day. We'll get it together. Okay.
Oh my God.
Like,
So one that we hear about a lot is this idea that Jesus himself defined marriage as, a relationship between a man and a woman.
yeah.
So let's just talk quickly about this verse, right, that everybody talks about, which
Yeah.
is Matthew 19. It's funny because his response is actually in response to a direct question. So the Pharisees are coming to Jesus and they're trying to trick him, right? They're trying to get him to say like the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And they ask him a question about divorce between a man and a woman, and he responds in kind. So I never understand, like, well, how is that condemning same-sex relationships? He's asked a question about marriage and he responds with an answer about marriage. I don't think that really proves anything, right?
No.
So let me read the
No.
full verse because I think people oftentimes they're just given that one little blurb from Jesus.
Yeah, they're
And
getting,
maybe
they're
they
getting like a
haven't heard.
soundbite. Right. And they're
Yes.
not looking at the full contextual awareness. And like your point is so key. Like if you're being asked a direct question and you're responding in kind to that direct question, that should not be used as a way to address a completely different topic over
Yes.
here. Even though, like, it's like you could take that little soundbite and like incorrectly do it, but that's the point you're making. Like we have to look at it in totality. So
Yeah.
do you have this? Do you have
Yeah. Do you want me to
let's
read it? Okay.
Yeah, let's read it.
So some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.' Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman commits adultery. Here is what his response shows, okay?
Yep.
It shows that divorce was allowed under Moses, right? Because of human hardness of heart, that God's original design is for permanent union, but it also exposes how women were harmed. There's a lot of scholars who say this is actually more about protecting women at the time, because if you were a divorced woman in this society, it put women in an incredibly vulnerable spot,
It was
right? A lot
dangerous
of
for them.
women, it was dangerous.
They might not
lost
be
all
able
their
to
rights.
eat.
Yes. A lot of them would have to go in and start doing slave labor. Some of them would become prostitutes because they were kicked out of their home and they had nowhere to go. They had no rights. If they didn't have a family to go back to and be taken care of, they literally were like left alone to just fend for themselves.
Right.
And so it was, also protecting women, right? That no, you can't just as a man discard your wife whenever you feel like it, because that's what was going on.
Weird. Like Jesus was saying something to protect the vulnerable.
I know.
That's what this scripture
Shocking.
is about, right? This is what the
Mhm.
scripture is about. So, like,
Yeah.
again, like, irony is an interesting thing. Like, if you're using this scripture to further condemn or create an environment of harm or discrimination against a vulnerable population, we have to dig deeper. That's what the
Yeah.
scripture is about. And I think Jesus was very poignant in the way that he spoke and the themes that he wove throughout his ministry. And like, it's not enough, you guys, to say, like,
Yeah.
well, he defined it, so that's how it is. When he was responding to a question, and his response to a question was preventing further harm to what he is seeing as a vulnerable population. So I don't know, like if we're really being critical thinkers in our faith and wanting to be more Christ-like, I would encourage us all to say like, wow, yeah, no, he was speaking up on a population that really had no rights, no voice. They would be kicked out of their homes if people felt called to do that. And man, we could draw a lot of parallels to the homosexuality community that we see today. You know?
Yeah. I know. So well said, Jace. So well said. And the thing that was interesting that I found in my research that I didn't know is that this whole idea of one man, one woman romantic marriage actually didn't even come from the Bible. It actually came from like the 19th and 20th centuries. So, this whole thing of choosing your partner, marrying for love, emotional compatibility, right? The way we understand it today.
Yeah.
It came from the 18th century during the Enlightenment, right? Enlightenment ideas, new ways of seeing things. The 19th century had this kind of like Victorian romanticism that got laid into it. And then in the 20th century, more of like a psychological and companionship idea of marriage and what that brings to the table. So it actually is like a later framework
Yeah.
that we're working with anyway, in terms of marriage just in general.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about, like marriage was about lineage, it was about having children, it was about forming family alliances. Like it was not viewed in the same way during biblical times at all. Right?
No. And like,
No.
wasn't there even, and maybe I don't have this right, but like during those times too, like didn't men sometimes have multiple wives?
Yes. So let me get into that, Jason,
Oh,
because if we want to talk about quote unquote biblical marriage, then we have to look at all the different forms of marriage that existed in the Bible and that Jesus didn't condemn. Right. So
Yeah.
one is polygamy. And now, while this is more common in the Old Testament and was more rare during Jesus's day, it was still around. And so that was the practice, right, of having multiple wives. Then you had people who engaged in having concubines. So a concubine basically was a woman who was a second wife who was there for sex. And they would often have to help in the labor, but they had no rights as a wife would. So it's like a horrible position to be in as a woman, right? Because you have no rights that a wife would normally get.
Yeah, you still have to have sex. Like,
Yes. I mean, it's like,
like, no, thank you.
and then I don't know how to pronounce this, Levirate, marriage. And that is basically when if a woman was married to a man and her husband dies, she would marry the brother, if that makes sense. So like, and then if
Well,
that
like, what
brother
if the
died and
brother
there was
already
another,
had a wife?
I don't know. Maybe then
Just
she
gets
becomes a
folded in?
concubine. I don't
Oh,
know.
god.
Or a polygamous situation. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then of course there was arranged marriage, which is where, the parents would choose who you would go and marry. And patriarchal marriage, which is, where the husband has basically total legal authority over his wife. So these are the different forms of marriage that existed. And Jesus never condemns any of the other ones either. So if we're looking at technically marriage and biblical marriage, then we have to look at all of them, right?
Okay, this is super helpful because, like, I wasn't really thinking about it in this context, right? So, like, the people that are like, "Hey, no, 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 it's between a man and a woman," like, very easily, you could say, like, "Well, like, actually, let's do research on when the Bible was written, and the marriage wasn't always between a man and a woman as simply as people are trying to make
Right.
it." But, like, now let's even think about, like, okay, think about um how Christianity grew throughout Europe, right? And in royal families, like, people are marrying, like, first cousins. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, think about that, right? Like, now, okay, so it's like, yeah, it's between a man and a woman, but, like, is it okay that it's a first cousin, right? Like,
Yeah.
or like that you're marrying your uncle or that you're marrying your niece? People are not realizing how off mainstream, quote unquote, traditional marriage has been throughout the ages. All
Hmm.
they're really hanging their hat on is like, no, same sex, it's between a man and a woman. It's like, well, what does it mean when it's between a man and a woman? We're seeing many different variations that I would say most of us in modern times would say, like, that's not exactly maybe what we mean by between man and a woman. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about something you and I have discussed just in personal conversations, and
Yeah.
that is the fruit of the spirit test, right? We are
Oh,
told in
love this
scripture that
one.
the way to know what is of God is to look at the fruit that it produces. And we're also told that a good tree cannot produce bad fruit and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit, right? So we
Mhm.
will know if something is of God by the outcomes and what it creates out in the world and amongst people. And when we look at the theology behind homosexuality as a sin,
Mhm.
there is so much harm that has been done through this thought process and with this belief. And so we're going to go into some of the stats. Let's just talk about assaults and hate crimes, okay? So according to the FBI's 2024 hate crime report, there were 2,413 single bias hate crime incidents targeting people because of sexual orientation or gender. In 2024, those in the LGBTQ community made up about 17.2% of all reported hate crimes. And a 2023-24 tracking by GLAAD's Alert Desk recorded hundreds of assaults, injuries, and even deaths tied to anti-LGBTQ bias, including violent attacks, threats, vandalism, and other hate-motivated incidents. And a report from Williams Institute, this is so sad, UCLA School of Law, found that LGBTQ people in the U.S. are 5 times more likely than non-LGBTQ people to experience violent victimizations, rape, assault, and robbery. How sad is that?
Like, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, I don't like,
And that's just one set. That's just hate crimes. Let's continue, shall we? Let's keep looking at this. Let's also go on to the psychological data, which is often a very real source of harm for people. And this is one I just want to point out because this is really interesting information coming out of the Trevor Project, which has done research showing children and young adults who have grown up in affirming households or having at least some affirming people around them and non affirming. Because what a
yeah.
lot of people argue is that homosexuality, the damage that it does with depression, suicide, anxiety, etc., well, that's a result of their sin. That's because they're living in sin as homosexuals, and that's why they're having high suicide rates and whatever. No, because now we have the data to prove that children and young adults who grow up in families or have at least one affirming source in their life are 40% less likely to commit suicide than those in non affirming household or environments. This is not the result of sin. This is a result of harmful theology that has trickled out in our society and is causing deep harm. That's what this is. It's so sad. So, anyway, A systemic review of many studies concluded for LGBTQ adolescents, social support, especially family support, is the strongest protective factor for mental health. Those with support report less anxiety, less depression, and lower suicidal ideation and attempts. And then in addition, you just look even in our comments, Jace, at
Yeah.
the number of families that have been ripped apart. I don't know the exact stats on this, but I know that a large number of the homeless population, youth that are out on the streets, are part of the LGBTQ community. They've been kicked out of their homes. You look at parents who have disowned children, siblings who are not talking to other siblings,
Wow.
families that have been ripped apart. This causes deep, deep harm and hurt. How can that be of God?
It's not.
And
It's
on the
not.
flip side, what is someone's loving same-sex consensual relationship? What harm does that bring? People might have their own misperceptions on that it harms kids or it's going to make kids gay or it's going to, but really, what harm does that do in our society? Does it hurt anyone physically? Does it?
No. No.
I mean, like,
No. I know. Like, I know. I think about this often. Like, why are we so preoccupied? Why are we so preoccupied with how other people are choosing to live their lives? Like, it's really something.
doesn't make
Okay.
any sense.
So I want to say something about, we have a very clear definition of what and who God is. Like, God is love. If love is present, God is there, and like, if we as parents, as family members, as friends, as people in our community pull back our love, we are literally taking God out of that situation. And I think that that's how suicidal thoughts can breed. That's how mental health issues can come to be, right? Like when we take God out of the equation, that is when fear multiplies. And it's no surprise to me that people who are choosing God and who are choosing love in an environment where we're saying, like, hey, okay, like, as a parent or as a sibling or as a friend, I wasn't anticipating having a gay child, a gay sibling, a gay parent,
Mhm.
right? I wasn't
Yeah.
anticipating that, but I'm going to choose what Jesus modeled, and I'm going to choose to reflect and bring God into this situation. And that
Mhm.
is how healing can happen. We don't have to have all the answers, you guys. Like, we don't have to know everything that Jesus intended. We don't have to like crack the code. I think it's a really exciting and beautiful thing when we can use our
Yeah.
critical thinking and we can use history and context to chip away at the hate. But we don't have to have that figured out to say, like, is God here or not? And I would
Mhm.
say, like, when people are having suicidal ideation, when they're struggling mentally, when families are getting broken apart, when people are saying, like, God, my family is broken, but I feel like I don't have a choice because my pastor is saying that this is a sin and my kid's going to go to hell forever, right? And like they're bringing shame on my family. Choose love. Like,
Yeah.
choose love in that situation. Like, you don't have to go down this path that feels like it's quote unquote right when every bone in your body is saying, like, I just want to love, because we're
Mhm.
seeing like that's the problem. When we take God out of the situation, that's when bad things happen. And I love your whole like litmus test of like, what fruit does this bear?
Mhm.
If it's not forgiveness, if it isn't acceptance, is it if it isn't love, if it's not standing up for vulnerable populations that already have enough going against them,
Mhm. Yeah.
then are we really doing the right things as Christians? And I'm also hearing a lot of people too being like, this is why I hate the church. This is why I
Yeah.
don't follow Jesus. This is why. We get it, you guys. Like, these two things have
Mhm.
been conflated, but like, we're here to tell you we can make Christianity better. We can make our relationship with Jesus better. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have
Yeah.
just because it's always been and always, this is what everybody's always said. It doesn't have to be that way. So I don't know. I
Yeah.
just feel like if we're like to look for God in each other and in situations and we're actively choosing fear and hate, what are we doing?
And Something else that got brought up that was really interesting from one of the comments was someone who is gay was talking about how, hey, I had approval from my family, and that was wonderful. But what hurt me the most is people telling me that God didn't love me. And think about that. Let's just add that to this list. You and your theology are getting in between and literally turning people away from Jesus and God, telling them God doesn't love them, telling them, I accept this part of you, but not that, telling them you have to change or this is wrong. You were created wrong. I find it ironic that so many people in the comments are saying to you and me, well, I hope you're ready to stand on Judgment Day and be judged. And I'm like, who's really going to be judged? Because what I'm doing is trying to bring people to Jesus. What I'm doing is trying to model love the way Jesus taught me to do. What you're doing is getting in between someone and God. You don't think you're going to have to answer for that? And what if I have it right? You tell me all the time I have it wrong. Let's just play devil's advocate. What if I have it right and you're wrong? You're going to have to stand in front of God and answer for why you chose hate, bigotry, judgment, superiority, and division over love and acceptance. That's on you. I don't worry about my position. All I'm trying to do is love better.
Man, I mean, preach, preach. Like
It's just
we
so.
we talked a lot about like what it'll. Okay, yeah, to your point, like standing in front of Jesus and say like, I don't know, I didn't get it all right, but like I did my best to choose love every single time. I did my best to choose love, and you guys like, yeah, like okay, so if like you don't like the thought of being a homosexual, don't be gay. Don't be gay, right? Like, just don't do it. It's like that you don't have to be.
Then
and
you're
you don't
not
have to-
gay.
that-
Look,
yeah,
if you
that-
don't
yeah,
like, I don't
exactly.
like the thought of being a homosexual and being with a woman, because I'm not gay. I don't care if anybody else decides to do it. Like,
exactly. Like, that's my point. But don't stand
Yeah.
between them and don't make it harder for them to have a relationship with Jesus. And if you are so convinced that it's a sin, why wouldn't you want to make an environment where you could have Jesus work in their life and have that relationship directly with them? But how can Jesus work in somebody's life when they're not even allowed to come in the front door? You know what I mean? Like, think about that. If you're still, even after these episodes, if you're still dead set on homosexuality being a sin, fine, you do you. But like, you are now further preventing somebody to have a relationship with God, to have the most highest. And like, I want to be very clear. I do not, I mean, I'm sure people know by this point. I certainly don't think it's a sin. But my point is like, if you're still convinced, wouldn't the best situation be to have that person have Jesus be in their life and work on their heart? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
and we're still keeping them from doing that.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, let's keep going.
I know. I know. And after all that, I don't even know, because now these feel so like small in comparison. But now we're just going to go into like some of the reasons people just say why they don't like it. Okay. So a lot of people will just be like, I just think it's gross. I feel uncomfortable. It seems weird. It makes them feel icky. Right. And to that, I always think, one thing that you brought up, Jace, that was so important and key is that from a neuroscience perspective, anything that is different, we see as a threat, right? So it makes sense that something that is out of the norm or against the usual way of doing something might make us feel a little bit of discomfort. And that's with anything. And it's a survival
For sure.
mechanism, right? Like
Yeah.
anything new and different is a threat. So there's that kind of neuroscience response to it. But let's just cut to the chase, right? Because I think what happens is when people think about a homosexual couple, right away they go to the bedroom in their mind. What does this person do with other men in a sexual way? Well, guess what? When I think about my parents having sex, my neighbor having sex, my boss having sex, it grosses me out, right? Nobody likes to think about anybody else doing stuff in the boudoir, right? So of
Oh my
course,
gosh,
it's
this
gross.
makes such a good point. Like, if you're so preoccupied with homosexual sex, like maybe it's you. Like, maybe, like, listen, like, maybe it's you that is, like, a little too preoccupied with sex, right? Like, it's such a good point. Like, why are we immediately going there and obsessing about it when, like, there's so much
Yeah.
more to the relationship than the bedroom?
Yeah. But also it's just gross to think about anybody, right?
I know.
And I'm just making the point of
Except
like
me. I feel
just
like
because
I'm just kidding.
just be, yeah, not with you. No. I'm making the point though that like it's just because it seems gross doesn't mean that it's a sin. Because by that
Great point.
argument, then my parents shouldn't be having sex because that grosses me out. My grandparents sure as hell shouldn't be having sex because that's
Right, exactly.
downright
100%.
bleh.
It's disgusting.
It's just not a valid argument in my
It's
mind.
not.
Okay.
It's not.
So
Totally.
your discomfort is just a reflex. It's not
Well,
moral
sex is
authority.
kind of gross. It's one of those, like, you had to be
Yeah.
there kind of things.
Dude, turn the lights off.
There's nobody needs to see this.
Nobody needs to see this.
Especially over 40. I'm like, I got to really strategize on the angles. I like after 3 kids, we got to just
God.
we can't
Lighting,
bend the
lighting.
wrong way. Lighting,
It's just
right.
like the podcast, lighting.
Yeah, we have to have the right
Put
lighting.
dimmer
And with
switches
sex,
on.
they're off.
We're just going to dim. Pull
Yeah,
the
we're going to start
shades.
recording our podcast in the dark now, you guys.
Okay, so another one we recently got in the comments that I just want to touch on is a lot of people saying like, well, nature proves that homosexuality is a sin because I don't see gay animals running around. This actually is false. I did some research on it. And did you know, Jaisa, there are actually over 1,500 animal species that have been observed engaging in same-sex relations.
No. Do you know some of them?
Everything from like beetles all the way up to lions, giraffes,
I could see that.
dolphins, primates.
Giraffes. Wow.
Like it's actually quite common. So I personally don't really love the animal argument in general because I just feel like, well, we're not animals. But if we're going to go there and you're going to use it as like, well, I don't see gay bunnies. Well, actually, there are. So I don't know what to tell you. So
yeah,
maybe
there's probably like gay bunnies baby in your backyard right now, and you're like, it's not natural. And you're like, actually, like, look outside. I don't know what to say.
Picturing like in the background 2 gay bunnies
just going at it. I know, but seriously, it's like, but it's a slippery slope fallacy, right? Like we see the same thing of people just being like, well, it's unnatural. Just look at the animal kingdom. Okay, first of all, we're not animals. And secondly, like we're chipping away at that. Like we act, there's
but if you really want to go there,
actually there are.
Oh my gosh, sidebar. I have to tell you, there were 2 very famous gay penguin couples. One in Sydney, Australia at a zoo.
Of course they're in Sydney.
Yes.
Oh my God,
There's and one in New York. And the couple in New York, now I don't know about Sydney, but the couple in New York actually had raised children, little baby penguins together. Okay? So, and there was a children's book made about it.
Stop.
Yes. How cute is that?
That is so cute. I love like how like they're just crushing life. They're like, we're in Australia, we're in New York, like we're global, and we're just fucking doing this and we're raising our penguins. Like, let's go.
Happy as can be. Okay.
Oh God, I love that.
So there you
go.
Oh
my gosh, we should figure out what that children's book is and talk about it on the on the pod. Okay. Keep going.
I know. Okay. Another thing, I just want to talk about how the whole concept of homosexuality has changed. Okay. So I just want to look at literature because we've all read a book where someone refers to gay and they're not meaning homosexual. They're meaning happy or joyful, right? So I'm going to give you an example. Little Women. Okay. If you read the book Little Women, here's direct quotes. Plumfield is about as gay as a churchyard. So this, I'm pointing out the fact of like, you can't just take older texts and put your lens on it or you will misinterpret. And if this is something within the last, within the 20th century, that if we were to read just in today's context and misunderstand, imagine 2,000 years ago. Okay. Also, Charles Dickens, a gay and frolicsome crowd. Okay. If we read that in today's context, it might sound
we'd be like, that's the gay pride parade.
I mean,
right? Like what? You make such a good point.
Yeah.
This is such a good point.
Yeah. So if it's that recent and we can have that kind of misunderstanding, imagine from biblical times. That's all I'm going to say. Enough said. Now we're going to
You
go
brought
on the gay
receipts
but
today, girl. I mean, you were like,
now we're going to
we're
go
hitting this on every angle.
now we're going to do the gay but celibate argument, right? Because some people will say it's not a sin to be gay, it's a sin to act on it. So it's not the being gay that's a sin, it's the action of actually engaging in same-sex relations that's wrong. But Jace, we were just talking about this that marriage is so much more than just sex, right? Like what we
Absolutely.
gain from our marriage from our husbands is companionship and loyalty and connection and relationship and family and all these beautiful things, right? Intimacy in an emotional way. And certainly physical intimacy is a part of that. But when we
Of course,
tell
yeah.
people they can't act on this or they can't be in a relationship with someone, it not only makes them feel like they're on the outside looking in and they're not part of society, but it robs them of a beautiful, loving relationship that is meaningful to them. I don't care how
Ugh.
you view it. It's meaningful to them and can bring so much joy to their life. And to try and take that from someone, I just think is so cruel.
I know. That's such a that's
You
such a good
know?
point. Like, I think we've way oversimplified this to acts of the bedrooms, the
Yes.
actual physical act of sex. And I'm just gonna speak for myself. Like, my husband is my best friend. He is my partner. I mean, we have
Mhm.
navigated uh, hellish, nightmarish situations together, which are part of life, which are part of,
Yeah.
everybody's life, and issues at work and losing parents and friends and, just navigating the ups and downs and like the full human experience. I don't know where I would be without my husband, without my
I
life
know.
partner. And I want that so badly for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody. And I want it to be what they want it to be. And
I
I think
know.
so much as like spiritual beings to think that we are limited to finding love with somebody based on their physical attributes is just delusional. I am in love with my husband's soul of who he is.
Yes.
And I think a
Yes.
lot of people have expressed like their journey as, like people who were straight and were in loving, straight, heterosexual relationships for 20 years, had kids, happy
Yeah.
as clams. And then they meet somebody later in life and they fall in love with their soul. I don't think that those individuals ever thought or intended to necessarily be homosexuals, but they are expressing like, I met somebody and I fell in love with them. And their physical attributes became secondary to the soul connection, the mental connection, the absolute love that transcended this physical experience. And I think
Yeah.
like that's a really big part of it too, because my connection with my husband, like, of like, I'm absolutely physically connected with him, but like it is so much more than that. Like I talk about
Mhm.
this a lot. I'm like, I'm so in love with your brain and your spirit and your energy. And that
Yes.
to me is it. And he was like, you can bang the shit out of my brain anytime. So he's like joking. But I'm serious. Like
Yeah.
I am. And I want that for everybody. I
I
want
know.
that for
I
everybody
know.
because I feel like our relationship is like such a God-given gift. And to put limitations on and like that, okay, so just to back up, I guess like my point is like to limit somebody and say, like, okay, well, it's okay that you're gay, but you can't have sex with other people.
Mhm.
You guys, that is like such a bullshit statement to
Yeah.
like limit and boil down and to like that is cruel. That's what that is.
Yeah.
It is cruel to say like, yeah, no, you're only going to go to hell if you have sex with that person. But make sure that you can't have a companion, you can't have a life partner, you can't have a lifelong friend to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. You can't raise children, you can't raise
Yeah.
children. You know how many kids, like, okay, I'm going to go off for a second. The people that are like in like very far right, pro life, every life is sacred. Do you know how many amazing, loving, same-sex relationships and families would love to take children in and to raise them and to have them, and they're
Mhm.
there with, being forced into families that don't want them, can't support them or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
Yeah.
what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah.
It's just wrong end to end. So not only are we limiting people's ability to love and to have connection and to have happiness in this life, we are
Yeah.
also potentially limiting people having a safe, stable, loving home of somebody that wants them so badly. Like why would we limit?
I know.
Why would we limit?
You know
I don't
what?
know.
All right, you guys. So I just took a minute because based on our conversation and your point, Jasa, I was like, let's pull up some facts on children raised by gay parents versus heterosexual parents, right? And this is what it says. Every major professional organization has reached this conclusion that children of gay parents do just as well as children of heterosexual parents. This is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychological Association, the American Sociological Association, and the American Medical Association. And it's over 40 years of research consistently supporting this. There
The
is
fruit of the
no
spirit, you
harm.
guys.
I
The fruit
know.
of the
I
spirit. Like
know.
let's look at that right there. Let's look at that right there.
40 years of research from
40
very
years
well
of
established,
research.
credible
E
resources. Yes.
Exactly, and, like, think about that. That means
Yeah.
that God is in these relationships because love is. Kids thrive in loving relationships, you know what I mean? So, sometimes it helps to see the forest through the trees, right? Like, to kinda see, like, the end result of some of this stuff. 40 years of research of children who may or may not be from their biological parents, right? Because, like, obviously, we know with surrogacy and IVF that a lot of same sex relationships can have genetically their own children.
Yes.
But, like, that even aside, these kids are thriving in these environments because God is
Yeah.
there. That's all we need. That's all we need to know. You could debate theology, you can debate cultures and politics and all of that, but that is a proof point that love is in
Mhm.
that relationship. And that is the fruit of the spirit. So, like, listen, we can debate till we're blue in the face, but ultimately, we say a lot like we follow the fun, we also follow the fruit, you know? And if
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing and that's a result of loving same sex consensual relationships, the end, people. That should be enough for us. That should be enough
Yes.
for us.
So well said. Absolutely.
I like just there's like endless information. So
I know. I know.
we need to do a couple follow-up episodes. One of those is how I think homosexuality has been revered and regarded in other indigenous cultures before
Yes. Yes.
colonization of Christianity,
Yes.
right? Like a lot
Yep.
of like spoiler alert, a lot of indigenous cultures actually saw this as like a very spiritual gifted individual. Okay.
I
So
know.
that's
I
one.
know.
Another thing I think would be really interesting is to see how homosexuality has evolved within the church itself, right? Because
Yes.
obviously you have the sacrament of marriage, but then you also have another sacrament for individuals that maybe were not quote unquote suited for marriage. And I'm finding out a lot in my research that those are individuals that are homosexuals and they feel like they have no
Mhm.
choice. So they go into the church, right? Which obviously we've
And by
seen how
church, you mean
that's
priesthood, right?
priesthood. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
yeah, where people have been forced into situations because of what's quote unquote right and wrong. A lot of history here that I just think is important that we keep chipping away at, Rach. So
History
more to
is
come.
everything. It really is. I mean, there's
I
so
know.
much that we can learn, and it's so important for us to know where, how these beliefs and theological ideas have come from. So we will keep exploring. You guys keep listening. We are so
Yeah.
glad you're here. If you like this, if you feel like it would be helpful, or perhaps it could even start a conversation with someone that you've been wanting to have, but you feel like it's hard, make sure to favorite it, share it, like it. We really want to help spread the word about this. Our whole goal is just to try and help there be a little bit more connection, less judgment, and more love out there in the world. So, with
Absolutely.
that,
We love you guys. Talk to you
yes.
next week.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you're ready to take your spirituality to the next level, be sure to check out our website, spiritoutspoken.com. There you can download free educational resources, read our latest blog posts, and join the Spirit Outspoken community.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Spirit Outspoken to stay up to date on news, happenings, shenanigans, and all things Spirit Outspoken.